The internet is currently a smoking crater. When I put the baby boomers on blast for their economic delusions and their cognitive dissonance, the comments section was a war zone. When I took a clinical chainsaw to Generation X and exposed the ice-cold dismissive avoidance of the latchkey generation, the ghost finally came out of the woodwork to tell me to shut my mouth. And through it all, there was one demographic cheering the loudest in the comments. There was one generation hitting the share button, tagging their parents, and typing louder for the people in the back.
The Millennials.
You guys loved watching the older generations get put under the clinical microscope. You felt validated. You felt seen. You thought this platform was your personal safe space to collect psychological ammunition against the people who raised you. Well, wipe that smug look off your faces, pack your emotional water bottles, and pull up a chair. Because in the spirit of absolute, unvarnished, brutal fairness, you're officially on the menu. If the baby boomers are a brick wall built in an alternate reality and Generation X is a ghost town with a sniper on the water tower, then millennials are an endless, fluorescent lit therapy lounge where everyone is trauma dumping into a hypercardioid microphone, desperately waiting for a participation coupon that modern society refuses to cash. Every single day, millions of millennials walk through the world wrapped in a protective suit of clinical terminology. You don't have bad habits, you have executive dysfunction. You aren't dealing with normal relationship friction, you're being gaslit by a narcissist. You haven't built a lifestyle around comfort and avoidance, you're just protecting your peace and recovering from burnout. You've weaponized the dictionary of psychology to shield yourselves from the agonizing, liberating weight of personal accountability. Today on Sober Psychology, the training wheels are coming off. We aren't here to cry about your childhood, we aren't here to coddle your inner child, and we're definitely not giving out trophies at the end of this episode. We're going to dissect the cultural archetype of the millennial generation with clinical precision and hard biblical truth. We're talking about the mass production of the anxious-preoccupied attachment style, the psychological dependency on external validation, the economic whiplash of transitioning into a brutal 2026 reality, and the deep spiritual tragedy of a demographic that traded the sacrificial call of adulthood for the golden calf of perpetual youth. If you're a millennial ready to actually heal instead of just talking about healing, or if you're just tired of running on the hamster wheel of endless self-analysis without any actual change, you need to understand the machinery of this mindset. I'm Michael, I'm a psychologist in training, I'm a sober dad, and today we're shining a stadium floodlight directly into the overanalyzed, praise-addicted landscape of Generation Me. Let's get to work. Not that I need to prove anything, but a lot of you boomers and Gen Xers told me that I was filming from my mom's basement. This is my house, you idiots. Anyways, welcome back to the show, everybody. If you're tuning in on Spotify or you're watching right here on YouTube, I appreciate you for sitting at the table with me yet again for another generational breakdown. This time, we're talking about the millennials. As we've done in the previous episodes, let's lay down our baseline guardrails right out of the gate before the emails and the negative comments start flooding in. What we are doing today is a macro psychological generalization. Human behavior exists on a vast, intricate spectrum. Not every single person born between 1981 and 1996 fits perfectly into the boxes that we're going to dissect today. If you're a millennial who's built radical resilience, taken extreme ownership of your life, stepped into genuine elderhood for your kids, and stopped using your past as a legal brief for your present failures, praise God. You are the exception, breaking the mold. But today, we're diagnosing the cultural and statistical archetype. We're looking at the sociological conveyor belt, if you will, that processes the vast majority of this generation. Also, for all of you boomers and Gen Xers that made fun of me for wearing a hat backwards as if that was something that invalidated the statistical and psychological facts that I was stating, this is why I wear a hat. I don't want to fix my hair to record an episode that I do for a hobby, not a job. Continuing on, living and working out here in Midland, Texas, you see the generational handoff grinding gears in real time, as we discussed in the Gen X episode. In the Permian Basin, reality doesn't care about your feelings. The oil fields don't care about your self-actualization. You see millennial men and women out here grinding 70 hours a week trying to keep their families afloat in a ridiculous 2026 economy where inflation has systematically choked out the traditional American dream. However, There is a distinct psychological fracture in the millennial worker and the parent that sets them apart from the boomer or the Gen Xer. When a boomer hits a wall, they default to rage and stubbornness. When a Gen Xer hits a wall, they default to cold, cynical isolation. But when a millennial hits a wall, they default to a frantic, agonizing search for someone, anyone, to tell them that they're doing a good job, followed immediately by a self-imposed diagnostic label to explain why they shouldn't have to climb the wall in the first place. To understand why this generation is so profoundly addicted to validation and so terrified of objective failure, we've got to look at the incubation chamber in which they were marinated, just like we did with the Gen X, during the most critical periods of their brain development. As we've stated in the previous episodes, every generation is a direct, involuntary reaction to the architecture of the one that built it. The millennials were raised predominantly by baby boomers, and to understand the millennial, you've got to understand the catastrophic psychological experiment the boomers ran on their children under the guise of self-esteem parenting. In developmental psychology, we study the critical difference between intrinsic motivation, which is doing something for the internal reward of mastery and character, and extrinsic motivation, which is doing something purely for the external reward, like praise or the gold star or the applause. The boomer generation, who was obsessed with their own self-actualization, looked at their children and they decided that the highest goal of parenting was to ensure that their kids never felt a single moment of rejection, failure, or negative effect. Enter the era of the participation trophy. This wasn't just a harmless cultural quirk, it was a massive structural rewiring of the developing child's reward pathways. When you give a child a trophy for finishing 8 out of 8, you're not building self-esteem. You're teaching their neurological prediction machine a lie. You exist, therefore the world owes you applause. When praise is decoupled from competence, the child doesn't develop authentic confidence. They develop an insatiable, fragile dependence on the feedback loop. They become praise junkies. As the millennial brain was entering adolescence, the single most disruptive technological shift in human history occurred: the birth of the consumer internet and early social media. Gen X grew up completely analog. Gen Z grew up completely digital. Millennials are the bridge generation. They remember the world before the algorithms, but they were young enough to have their identity formation completely hijacked by them. Think about that psychological impact right at the moment when a teenager is trying to answer the core identity question, which was posed by developmental psychologist Erik Erikson, the identity versus role confusion. Millennials were handed digital mirrors. They were the test subjects for MySpace and Facebook and early Instagram. Identity stopped being something that you forged through real-world trial and error and physical suffering. It became an asset that you curated, edited, and uploaded for public consumption. The validation loop that started with participation trophies from their parents was seamlessly handed off to the dopamine machine of likes, comments, and follower counts. The clinical reality check of all of this is that you didn't learn how to establish and develop a stable sense of self. You learned how to maintain a digital brand. And when your curated brand doesn't match your chaotic internal reality, the brain experiences profound cognitive dissonance, which manifests into chronic low-grade anxiety. Let's look at this through the lens of one of my favorite elements of psychology. If you've paid any attention to this channel, you know I'm addicted to attachment theory, which was pioneered by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. We know that the child's brain builds an internal working model based on parental consistency. Boomers parented with authoritarian distance and institutional expectation. Gen X parented with structural neglect, which is the latchkey model, which created a dismissive avoidance. And then boomers parenting millennials, however, introduced a hyper-involved hovering style, which we know as the helicopter parent. This hyper-attunement wasn't rooted in genuine emotional connection. It was rooted in control and achievement curation. The parent was consistently present, physically and logistically, but emotionally inconsistent. They were highly rewarding when the child performed, achieved, or looked perfect, but they were deeply uncomfortable with the child's negative emotions, raw anger, or weakness. This environment breeds the anxious-preoccupied attachment style on a generational scale. The core belief of the anxious-preoccupied individual is, I'm fundamentally flawed, and my security depends entirely on my ability to monitor others' reactions to me and secure their ongoing approval. When you see a 35-year-old millennial completely unravel because their manager sent a Slack message saying, hey, do you have a minute to talk later? You're looking at that attachment machinery in motion. The brain instantly predicts abandonment or catastrophic failure because its internal scaffolding is completely externalized. Now, whatever millennials I have hanging in there with me and rooting for me and being on my team or whatever you want to say, this is where I'm probably going to lose you. We're going to talk about the most insidious defense mechanism of the modern millennial, the weaponization of clinical nomenclature. In her incredible sociological and psychological research, Dr. Jean Twenge documented the staggering rise in narcissism, anxiety, and external locus of control among youth moving into 2000s and 2010s. Millennials became the most therapy literate generation in history, and on the surface, that sounds like progress. We love mental health awareness, right? But here's the brutal truth. Millennials didn't use therapy language to heal. Many used it to construct a bulletproof alibi. To help further break this down, I'm going to give you examples of healthy uses of psychology and then show you how millennials will weaponize this. We're going to call it their shield. A healthy use of psychology is identifying a blind spot in order to take responsibility. A millennial who weaponizes this to use as their shield will use it as labeling a flaw to claim exemption for growth. Another example of healthy uses of psychology is processing past hurt in order to build future resilience. A millennial's shield would be archiving past hurt in order to justify current dysfunction. And the last example of healthy use of psychology would be setting boundaries to manage personal capacity. A millennial's shield is going to be using boundaries to cut off anyone who challenges comfort. If a relationship requires deep, agonizing compromise and self-sacrifice, you don't look at your own selfishness. You label your partner as toxic or avoidant, and then you write a Substack about cutting them off to protect your energy. If you struggle to show up to work on time, finish tedious tasks, or handle the baseline friction of a 40-hour work week, you don't diagnose your lack of discipline or your phone addiction. You instantly diagnose yourself with neurodivergence or chronic burnout or ADHD. This is what clinical psychology calls secondary gain. When the maintenance of a system or a label provides more benefit to the ego than the cure. If I'm broken, if I'm traumatized, if I'm permanently damaged by my boomer parents or systemic capitalism, then I don't have to face my terrifying reality of my own squandered potential. The label becomes a comfortable cage. Let's step past the clinical data and look at this from the uncompromising spiritual and biblical perspective. The primary spiritual stronghold of a millennial generation is a worldview that sociologists call the Moralistic Therapeutic Deism. It's a counterfeit gospel that has infected thousands of churches across this country, and it fits the millennial psychological profile like a glove. It consists of a few basic beliefs. Number one, God wants you to be happy and feel good about yourself. Number two, the central goal of life is self-love and self-actualization. And number three, God doesn't need to be particularly involved in your life except when you need him to solve a problem or validate your worth. Ooh, y'all about to get me fired up. This turns the living creator of the universe into an ethereal therapist who sits in the sky holding a clipboard, nodding along to your grievances and handing out cosmic participation trophies. It strips the faith of the cross, of repentance, of sanctification, and the absolute lordship of Jesus Christ. In 2 Timothy 4:3, the Apostle Paul gives a terrifyingly accurate prophecy of this mindset. For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions. Millennials are the ultimate itching ears generation. You want podcast books and sermons to tell you how special you are, how unique your trauma is, and how much the world has misunderstood you. You want a gospel that requires absolute affirmation but demands zero transformation. The secondary spiritual tragedy here is the absolute refusal to transition from youth to elderhood. Millennials are trapped in a state of adolescence. They're the Peter Pans of the modern era, clinging desperately to the aesthetics of youth because they're terrified of the heavy, silent weight of mature responsibility. Think about the cultural markers. We have an entire generation of 38-year-olds who are deeply obsessed with their childhood nostalgia, cartoon culture, collecting toys, and curating their inner child, while completely dropping the ball on building stable altars for their children. The Bible has an explicit command for this developmental transition. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11, Paul writes, "When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways." Giving up childish ways doesn't mean that you lose your joy. It means that you change your primary focus from consumption to stewardship. It means that you stop asking, "How does this make me feel?" and start asking, "What legacy am I building for the generation coming behind me?" When a generation refuses to grow up, they create a massive spiritual and emotional vacuum in the culture. Their children grow up without fathers and mothers who act like anchors. Instead, they get parents who act like older siblings competing with them for attention, validation, and screen time. You can't lead a family from the passenger seat of your own unresolved childhood drama. So how do we land on solid ground? If you're a millennial listening to this and the truth of this episode has stripped away your psychological armor, how do you step out of the validation trap in 2026? How do you break the cycle out here in the real world? Here's your tactical blueprint. Step 1, burn the alibi. Drop the clinical dictionary. Stop using your trauma, your upbringing, your neurodivergence, your ADHD, or economic anxieties as an excuse for your current lack of execution. Your past may explain your starting point, but it doesn't excuse your current stagnation. Take an internal locus of control. If your life is a mess in 2026, it's your responsibility to fix it, regardless of who broke it. As Galatians 6:5 clearly states, for each will have to bear his own load. Step 2, transition from validation to competence. Delete the social media apps if you need to. Stop looking for external applause to verify your worth. True psychological resilience is built in silence through the slow, agonizing mastery of difficult skills. Make yourself uncomfortable. Build a business. Fix your marriage. Stay sober, raise your kids, keep your word even when it hurts, and do it when nobody is watching, nobody is liking, and nobody is leaving a supportive comment. And finally, step 3, put away the shield of fragility. Stop pathologizing normal human discomfort. Anxiety is not a permanent identity. It's a neurological signal that you're facing a challenge or avoiding a necessary action. Burnout is often just the natural consequence of bad boundaries and phone-induced dopamine depletion. Stop running to a diagnostic cage every time reality gets heavy. 2 Timothy 1:7 tells us, for God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. You have the hardware for power and self-control. Start operating like it. And to the boomers and the Gen Xers who stayed just to watch the millennials get wrecked, don't you dare walk away from this episode feeling self-righteous. The millennial mindset is a direct downstream consequence of your parenting models, your cultural institutions, and your emotional absences. We're all caught in the machinery of generational brokenness. But on this show, as I say many times before, the buck stops here. As a sober dad, my job is to make sure the psychological shrapnel stops with me. I look at my kids and I refuse to hand them a legacy of validation addiction or diagnostic fragility. We're breaking generational curses on this platform through the power of raw truth, deep psychological integration, and the unmerited grace of God. That's all I've got for you today, folks. We walked through the therapy lounge, we tore down the shields, and I know the truth is heavy, but remember, the truth doesn't hurt you, it frees you. If you got any value out of this deep dive, do me a huge favor. Smash that subscribe button, leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, and share this episode with a millennial who needs to put down the label and pick up their cross. Drop down to the comments right now and let me know, what's the ultimate piece of clinical jargon that you've been using to excuse your own lack of discipline? Or what's the biggest validation trap that you've had to break out of in your own life? Let's talk about it in the comments. Let's look at the data. Let's let it go and let's get back to work. Keep your head up, keep your heart open, and go help somebody. Love you guys.